Hey, Discover listeners, The Ultimatum. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. This is the Psychology in Seattle YouTube channel. And as I always say, don't use YouTube as a replacement for therapy. If you need a therapist, get one. You deserve it. You really do. Let's watch.
All the guys were like, we're learning a ton about ourselves.
What were you learning about yourself?
Learning about myself through you. I'm like, okay, that's cool.
So you were talking good stuff about me.
Just like noticing things that.
Yeah, you would think if you were putting two and two together for yourself, if you're Alex, that eventually, maybe not now, but eventually, Antonio is going to tell Roxanne that Alex told Antonio that Roxanne told Alex a lot of terrible things about Antonio. I hope you all followed that. And I hope I got the names right. You would think if you're Alex, you would, upon being interrogated, you would say, what are you saying? Which I think is true, that he's talking about how they had a really long conversation about what they're learning about themselves. And that was true. That's what I observed. And you'd think that Alex would very quickly say, and also, by the way, I should just tell you that I had a long talk with Alex or with Antonio, and he was asking some very pointed questions, and I told him that the way that you talk about him seems to me that you don't want to be with him and that you don't really like him that much. I don't know if I overstepped my bounds, but it kind of seems like you don't want to be with him the way that you talk about him to me. And so he just kept asking me questions, and so I felt like I needed to say something, and so that's what I said. Now, I would like to think that if I were in Alex's position, I would tell Roxanne beforehand, so I'm the way you talk, or I might ask Roxanne some questions, just like, so do you want to be with Antonio, or what's going on there? Because if Roxanne answered the questions such that she was like, well, I don't know, and this would be all off camera, because on camera they can't have these conversations because they're supposed to be in this trial marriage, right? But I would want to know what the situation was, because if Roxanne says something like, well, yeah, I mean, he's just such a loser, and he's just always playing video games. He has no ambition. He's like a child. He's like a teen boy. It's really awful. I can't stand it. And I'd be like, oh, okay. Then that would indicate one thing to me. Another option is Roxanne might say something like, well, yeah, I mean, maybe I want to be with him. There's a lot of good things about him, but there's also a lot of things that really annoy me. And then I would have a different picture of what Roxanne's position is. But if it was that first one, then I might say something like, well, have you ever really just told Antonio that, or have you, what's going on? Because I care about you, Roxanne, but I also care about Antonio. I know him, not as well as I know you, but I care about him, and I guess I'm kind of worried that you're not going to tell him, and that he is not going to know this important information. I don't know. And so, well, it's going to be, what a weird situation that would be. Because I'm trying to think like what I would do. What would I do? I guess I would tell Roxanne, it depends on what Roxanne would be saying. But if Roxanne gave me a very obscure answer or dismissive answer, or she avoided the whole conversation or something, and because the way Roxanne talks about Antonio, it's pretty, I mean, it's not awful, but it's above some sort of threshold that anyone with a heart would worry about Antonio. I've already been worrying about, I was like, oh, Antonio, I'm sure, he has his issues too, but Kat and Antonio, both of them, I'm just like, oh, I feel bad for them. And maybe if I knew them in person, it would be different, but the way it's edited, anyway. So, yeah, I don't know. Because on one hand, it's like, well, Alex should be able to say what he saw, and Antonio deserves to know, but Alex does have a relationship of some sort with Roxanne, and you just did something behind her back. Now, you would think that eventually Roxanne would say, well, I did do a lot of things to provoke people, Alex and Alex's mom, to alert others about how much crap I talk. So you think she would, but yeah. Yeah. So in some ways, I think Alex is at fault here because but is he at fault? What do you think? Would you have done what Alex did? Just, outed Roxanne in this way? I don't know. It kind of depends on a lot of things that I don't know. How does Roxanne really feel? Is it in the direction of abuse? Roxanne and Antonio's relationship, is it not? I don't know.
That I didn't notice about myself.
I got a call from Antonio. You were telling him that I don't respect him. When have I ever said I don't respect him?
I think specifically behind closed doors.
When did I say respect?
You don't use the word respect.
Have I?
I wouldn't be surprised if she literally used the word, I don't respect him. But, I'm tempted to rewind and watch those scenes. Well, let's do that.
I was open to sleeping together. Like, I was open to hooking up. I was open to holding hands.
So is Alex open?
I think he's totally open. If I said Alex, he'd be like, 100%.
So I'm reminded of these scenes as well, and I think it is very explanatory. I don't have to comment on it, but I guess if you don't watch the show, what Roxanne is basically saying is that if she wanted to have sex with Alex, he would come running, and the way and maybe that's true, but the way she says it with Kat sitting right there is, there's a way to say that or refrain from saying that because you don't want to hurt Kat's feelings, but there doesn't seem to be any awareness or regard. It's not the worst thing that someone could do to Kat, but if Roxanne wanted to say something like, well, yeah, I'm getting the vibe maybe that, I don't see any point in saying that. I don't see any point in saying that in front of Kat. What are you trying to do? What's the goal? That is often one of the things to think about, and it's something that therapists are trained to think about, which is that there's always some subtext to what people are saying, and sometimes it's kind of simple subtext, but sometimes it can be quite complicated, and we don't always know what the subtext is, but there's always a subtext. And when she is saying that, Roxanne's saying, if I wanted to have sex with Alex, he would be up for it. He'd be very up for it. What's the subtext? And one of the ways of evaluating subtext is what's the effect? What's the conclusion that you draw from the statement? One conclusion you could draw from it is that Roxanne is a very attractive person, maybe more attractive than Kat or something. Or another message you could get is that Roxanne can have sex with whoever she wants to, or that Alex doesn't really like Kat. There's a lot of conclusions you can draw from that, and it's possible that one or all or none of those are the goal as to why she would say that in that way. And then you ask yourself, well, why would you want that goal? What's the overall goal there? And I don't know, but one could be that Roxanne is anxious socially, even though she doesn't come across that way, and is prone to saying things like this. We saw Vanessa do this in the previous season. When, according to Xander, when Vanessa's anxious socially, she will brag and say things that come across as narcissistic, even though deep down she doesn't really see herself that way all the time. So I don't know. It's just kind of a notable little scene that I'm rewatching.
Giving me so much insight to that. Like, you can be super successful, but with a partner, who supports you and makes you look good, and you're a power couple. So
Well, not just how it looks too, but also because like I can go home and go, honey, I have this problem. What?
Yes, I'm just kind of reviewing, knowing what I know now during later in the season. Some of these other scenes are starting to look more notable. So this is previously with Roxanne and Alex, or with Alex's parents. So this is the mom who calls Kat and says, I don't think Roxanne is very respectful of Antonio. But I remember noting this but it seems more relevant now, that Roxanne, so that what they're talking about is Roxanne saying, I never wanted to really get married because I'm so, business oriented. And Alex's parents are also entrepreneurs, and they're saying that that doesn't make sense to us because being married actually enhances our business. And Roxanne chimes in and says, oh yeah, like you can really build each other up, and you're like a power couple. It's hard to know what Roxanne means by that, but we could imagine what she means is the way that the mom interpreted it, which is the way it looks to the outside. And then the mom's like, well, it doesn't really matter how it looks to the outside, in terms of power couple image. It's because when you have stress about being an entrepreneur, you can support each other. So, I don't know what that means about Roxanne, but it's a data point of the way that she's oriented. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. So, I don't know about you, but when I go to bed at night, if I'm stressed out about something, then my mind will race with anxiety and I won't be able to sleep. For me, this is an indication that my mind is trying to work something out, either trying to solve a problem or process my feelings about something. And this is an indication that I probably should talk about it with someone who cares. And of course, therapy can help with this. It could be argued that therapy has always been and always will be a place for us to express these thoughts that are plaguing us. It's a place to be heard, and it's a place for us to hear ourselves as we talk things out loud. Well, one option worth trying is BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's worth giving a try. It's entirely online, it's designed to be convenient and suited to your schedule, and also you can switch therapists at any time at no additional charge. So get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
He is the butt of jokes. It's like, oh, like Antonio doesn't do this. And it's kind of like, oh, okay. That's kind of interesting. I don't know. Like, I wouldn't say that about a loved one, unless it was like something light.
Well, you don't really say much about anything, Alex.
Just when it's important.
Now this is important to you, all of a sudden, tonight.
Okay, so I went back and watched other scenes, and I don't know if I just couldn't find it, but I actually didn't find, I had an impression that Roxanne was being very disrespectful toward Antonio and dismissive of Antonio, but I actually couldn't find it, which is interesting. If it doesn't exist, why did I make it up? So what Alex says and what Alex's mom says, it's not hard to imagine that Roxanne would do things like that. But it's also notable that when I went back to look for things, I didn't find anything. I didn't watch everything, but anyway, it's possible that she does have a legitimate beef here of just like, because a lot of the things that she said a lot of positive, well, not a lot of positive, but she said nice things about Antonio that, well, not really qualities, but she said that they're best friends and that she hopes the best for him if and when they break up. So that was a nice thing to say. And I think it's just the way she talks about Alex. She was talking very frequently about how Alex has his stuff together and he's ambitious and she doesn't have to worry about him. And Roxanne is constantly trying to get Antonio to be like Alex and have his stuff together. And Alex just refuses to do what Roxanne tells him to do. And, it's just kind of interesting that you would have that kind of dynamic where your girlfriend is very frequently telling you that you need to do X, Y, and Z, and you don't do those things, Now, maybe Antonio's like, I need that push, or who knows, but it also could be quite awful the way that it's delivered and implemented. And given Antonio's reclusive, low self-esteemed place that he's in, it could take a toll on him. Anyway, but so yeah, they're talking about it. So I think given what we saw, she has a legitimate beef. And, his responses, I think, are possibly possibly fair that he's saying these things. There's another way he could say this. He'd be like, hey, I'm just saying that I can't really remember everything. A good thing to say, if you ever get in this kind of conversation, and I've been here before, not recently, but where someone's like, how when have I ever said that? How come you're saying that? It's a good time to just take a step back and say, well, maybe I'm wrong, and I don't remember everything that happened. And I don't really care to try to recall all the reasons why I would say this. But my narrative of the way that you talk about Antonio was that you just didn't like him very much and you didn't respect him. Yeah, I don't know what's in your heart, but it just came across as harsh sometimes. And I was surprised as to why you were ever with him in the first place. I would ask you questions. I didn't show this scene, but he was asking her, well, why are you with Antonio? Because I think he was asking questions because the way she talked about Antonio raised that question. Like, well, why are you even with this guy if he's nothing like the sort of partner that you want to be with? And she didn't really answer the question. She very quickly tracked to complaining about him again, and he even commented on it. He's like, well, that's why you break up with him. I asked you why why you're with him. And she never really answered that question. So, he could say that sort of thing, and then she could say, well, you're stupid, Alex, for believing that. And you'd be, okay, maybe I'm stupid. I mean, I don't know. It just was an observation that I had. And I felt bad for Antonio, so I thought I would tell him. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. It's just a way of pulling back because it's true. You don't know the real situation. It's a very liberating place that I love to be in, where I say, I don't know. And I think I do that a lot on this channel, where I'll just, because I believe it to be true. I believe it to be an accurate way of presenting evaluations and assessments of these kind of things. But even in therapy, if I'm talking to a client, I word it this way as well, because my journey with this is that in the beginning of my career, I was more insecure about myself as a therapist and felt this need to establish myself, at least for my own self-esteem, that I was good as a therapist. And there would be times when I would throw stuff out there and it would get rejected, and it would challenge, especially in the very beginning, it would really challenge my self-esteem as a therapist. And it was harder for me. The more confident I became, the more able I was to admit that I didn't know much. I just could hypothesize and throw stuff out there. I don't know until the client actually responds. And so that's why I say my assessments are collaborative in that way. I provide the expertise and my observation and my way of interviewing and this sort of thing. But the client is the one that tries it on for size. I'll throw stuff out there. They try it on for size. They see if it fits, and if it doesn't fit, then we put it back on the rack, sort of thing. Now, sometimes clients will reject things that are fitting. They're standing in front of the mirror, and it looks great on them, and they're like, "This is too big for me." And I'm wondering in those moments if it's too much, too hard for them to admit these things or to accept these things. And I don't push it. And also, I don't know, maybe it is too small for them. It doesn't look too small to me, but how would I know? They are them and live with themselves all the time. I only see them every once in a while. Plus, I have to remind myself that I'm just a therapist. I'm not some sort of God that can read people's minds or anything. So that's another thing. The other reason why I am very comfortable in the tentative I don't know position is that I have repeatedly been wrong as a therapist, where I will fall in love with an hypothesis and spout about it and sort of shove it down the client's throat. And the client will either forcefully or, nicely, diplomatically refuse it. And I will be kicking myself during the session and after that I did it again. This is a common therapist problem where we fall in love with our own ideas, and there's not another therapist or there's not a supervisor there to say, hey, because the client's not going to say that, right? Usually. And we have free reign to sort of believe in our own bullshit. And so I've done that before and then regretted it. Even if later I thought that I was close to the mark, at the very least I wasn't reading the room and I was just forging ahead without being therapeutic. You can be right as a therapist, so to speak, and still do the wrong thing because you're not actually helping the client. So I have had that happen so many times that I have learned that my habit now is this default place of tentativeness, and also because I have confidence in myself, I'm not constantly trying to establish myself as having worth as a therapist. The other thing is I don't attach my worth as a therapist to taking in information and then being accurate with some sort of with some sort of evaluation or assessment or diagnosis, because that's a fool's errand. That's not the definition of what a good therapist is. What the definition for people who know what they're doing, it's someone who's helpful, not someone who's right. Therapists don't have to be right to be helpful. In fact, this effort to be right could be really counter to being helpful to a client. So anyway, I would, if I were a little birdie on his shoulder, I would suggest just be tentative. Don't be so sure of things.
Much about anything, Alex.
Just when it's important.
Now this is important to you, all of a sudden, tonight.
Yeah, because I felt bad. Like, I would want to know that if I was in his shoes, I'd want to know, the person I love doesn't really respect me, trust me, kind of abuses that.
Do you think Kat thinks...
Okay, I'm glad he's saying that because I was wondering why he even told Antonio. My suspicion was that, but we don't really know. They haven't really shown us much. And Alex even admits, and people say, Kat and Roxanne will say that Alex is very reserved. He doesn't say much. But I will say that he has talked and revealed things. And I think by contrast to the other three guys on the show, yeah, he's more reserved. But I wouldn't say that he's like pathologically avoidant of things. And it's kind of interesting, Alex, because the way I think it's tempting, especially given the way that people talk about him, to really dislike Alex. Hearing Kat and Roxanne, particularly Roxanne, talk crap about him, I didn't really have an opinion about it because we didn't know much about him. But then I was like, oh, Alex sounds like, in the direction of a psychopath, like a con artist. Psychopathic liar, compulsive liar, a distant person, can't admit when he's wrong, feels superior to others maybe. I don't know. It's like, oosh, that sounds pretty awful. But then, especially as I was rewatching some of the clips, I think he kind of quietly has a respectable way of approaching these situations. I don't know. Maybe he's a jerk face later in the season. I can never know. But he just said, I felt bad for this guy that I barely even know. And I didn't have to tell him, but I just felt bad for him. If I were in his shoes, I'd want to know the way that you talk about him behind his back. So I don't know if it was the right thing to do without telling Roxanne, because he certainly could have. It's like, Roxanne, by the way, the way you talk about him, I feel bad. So I think is it okay if I tell him? Because I don't know if I can live with myself if I don't tell him the way that you talk about him. Or can you tell him the way that you talk about him? Because I get the impression that Antonio believes that you don't say those sorts of things about him when you do. Yeah. So he could have given her a chance. But yeah, anyway, so that's what he said. But he could be lying right now. Maybe he's just this constant liar.
Doesn't really respect me. Trust me.
Do you think-
Kind of abuses that.
Do you think Kat thinks you're the best guy in the world?
Yeah.
That appears to be the trend with you. You went in tonight telling my ex that I said.
So then she asks, do you think that Kat thinks you're the best guy in the world? And he says, yeah. It depends on what that means, right? If he's saying, yeah, Kat thinks that I'm literally the best man on the planet. I'm better in all ways than all their men. I think that's what Roxanne thinks he's saying, and maybe that is. But I think what he's saying is that, you know, in a way, it's a weird way to phrase it, but, you know, I believe my wife to be the best woman in the world, best person in the world, I guess. And I would never phrase it that way because that implies superiority. But I consider her to be a great person. And I would hope that she had, you know, something similar to that in terms of feelings about me. So I think maybe that's what he thinks he's answering. But the way that it sounded, it sounds narcissistic. And maybe he is. And I think that's what Roxanne is believing about him.
I said I don't respect him and that he's a whipping boy.
Never said that you said that. That's my interpretation of.
Maybe you should stop interpreting stuff. I thought this was a safe space for us, for you and I, to talk about our ex.
Yeah, I could see that, especially given watching the scenes again, which was much more nuanced than what I remembered it being. Yeah, I could. That's why I would have suggested to him that he tell her. I really want to tell him because I feel like it's not fair to him that that you have these ideas about him, and I don't think he has any clue about this. So yeah, even if it was in the direction that he's claiming that, you know, she's really harsh about him, yeah, I could. Now I think it's possible she's talking about two different things, because on one hand, they're being filmed a lot, right? That certainly isn't a safe place because it's being filmed and is going to be available to Antonio later on. But behind, away from the cameras, she probably felt like, well, hey, we're free to talk about things, and you're not going to just go straight to the other person. Yeah. I think because triangulation is a thing as well. That it's like, well, if you said those things that gave Alex that impression, then that's Alex's impression, and he has the right to say that, especially if he feels bad for I don't know. I could see a world in which if I had this bird's eye view on everything, where things played out where I would be more on Roxanne's side, but it just really depends on what was being said. All right, well, I want to thank y'all for subscribing to this channel and liking and commenting on this. But I think the main thing is subscribing, because for whatever reason, a lot of sponsors and advertisers look at that as their decision point. It's like you need a certain amount. Anyway, so because to me, it's like, what does it matter how many subscribers people have? It shouldn't matter how many views they get, right? But I don't know. I think it's kind of a holdover from I don't know. Who knows? It's not my thing. But so if you subscribe, it helps us out. And I think if you subscribe, then you'll see more of my content on your feed. I think that's the whole idea. If you don't want to see my stuff on the feed, then don't subscribe. There's also a bell that will send you notifications. That sometimes I try to use that and I don't really understand it. So anyway, but thanks for subscribing, and everyone please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.